Oregon's policy. Oh, sorry. The meeting is being recorded. Um, and we're hoping that kind of it will entice people to kind of look more deeply into the programs and policies that we're going to be doing. And if you have any specific program questions or policies that, certainly follow up with us. And in fact, we'll be providing, along with the emails, the links will be the bulleted points in the slides will actually be links to various programs, not just ours, including our partners at Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. Go ahead, next slide, please. So, Odo, our mission is to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable, clean energy transition, protect environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts on current and future generations. And so in the what we do, I think that while we do have various programs and policy development, for the most part, we don't actually implement all policies, and we're not, generally speaking, a regulator. But instead, we're often kind of playing more of a convening role and an educational role, for instance, around our biennial energy report and also biennial zero emission vehicle report, or BIZEV. Next slide, please. And I'm pleased to introduce and hand it over to Michael Friels.
Thanks, Tom. Nice job. Good afternoon, everyone. So, as Tom said, my name is Michael Friels. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at Odo. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. So, I'm going to start to really understand Oregon's fuel policy. You kind of have to understand how Oregon is situated as far as geography and also our energy system. So, let's start with looking at this Sankey diagram. It's a flow chart showing you where our energy comes from and where it's going, moving left to right. So, as you can see, the resources that are used to produce energy, like hydro, wind, natural gas, and petroleum fuels, you can see those all located throughout the diagram. You can certainly see how energy is converted to resources like electricity are used directly in buildings and industry. And you can see kind of the end uses as well as of how that energy ends up in households, businesses, and the transportation sector. So 2 points within this I want to highlight for you. So Oregon uses energy from a lot of different sources for a lot of different purposes. And second, some of that energy is produced within Oregon, like hydro, wind, and solar, but most is imported. So all the natural gas, petroleum, coal, and others are all imported into the state. So this is especially important when we're talking about fuels. So Oregon doesn't have petroleum resources or refineries within the state. Historically, we've produced some ethanol and biodiesel and some renewable diesel, or I'm sorry, renewable natural gas, but most of the fuels we consume, we import into the state. So this has an economic cost as most dollars spent on fuels immediately leave the state. So as I mentioned, the geography of Oregon is important too. So we're sandwiched by two larger economies in Washington State and California. And they both have their own fuel resources and refineries that Oregon just doesn't have. So Oregon fuel policy is heavily influenced by what's happening in these states. So if we jump to the next slide, let's take a look at a high level look at Oregon's fuel policy landscape. This is by no means a comprehensive list of all the fuel policies we have, but these are just a couple that we wanted to highlight for you. So let's start with kind of our decarbonization policy. So Executive Order 2004 established a decarbonization target for our work. So we're trying to achieve an 80% reduction in economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So in comparison to 1990 levels. And so that drives all the work that we're doing. We also have a climate protection program, which sets a declining cap or limit on greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels used throughout Oregon. And that includes, diesel, gasoline, natural gas. And this program is designed to reduce those emissions by 50% by 2035 and 90% by 2050. So fuel suppliers and natural gas utilities will support efficiency and conservation programs, but will also turn to using more low carbon fuels to reduce their attributed emissions. And that kind of goes into our alternative fuel policy. So if we look at our transportation fuel policy, the biggest one is our clean fuels program. So this is a market-based program designed to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels used within the state. And there's a credit and debit system. So there's annual average carbon intensity for gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And so fuel providers that supply fuels with carbon intensity below that threshold can generate credits, and those above that threshold generates deficits. And so those credits can be bought and sold or banked, and it creates a flexible kind of market-driven framework that encourages investment in cleaner fuel technologies within the state. So that can be electrification, or it could be the adoption of low carbon fuels like renewable diesel, other options. And then if we look at transportation electrification, it's really critical to bring that up. I know we're focused on fuels today, but it's important to balance that conversation and recognize that electrification is still Oregon's primary approach to decarbonizing the transportation sector. So we've got some policies like Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks, and both of those have requirements for auto manufacturers to sell an increasing percentage of zero emission light duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles within the state. And so those are still driving a lot of our transportation decisions and a lot of our fuel decisions. I'll also highlight we've got electric vehicle rebates, and we've got electric vehicle charging infrastructure programs, certainly ones focused on rural communities. So in particular, we've got a community charging rebates program, which provide rebates for the installation of level 2 charging. And 70% of that funding is reserved for rural and disadvantaged communities around the state. And then we're also participating in the NEVI program, which is working to build that connected network of fast charging across the country. And within the state of Oregon, certainly a strong focus on our rural travel corridors. So now let's lastly look at some of the low carbon fuel policy. So this first one, we created a biogas and renewable natural gas inventory. So this work started in 2018. It was us reviewing the opportunity of biogas within the state that could be used for transportation or could be used on site or for electricity generation. So we're basically looking at the landfills, wastewater treatment facilities, different opportunities to capture biogas across the state. And we identified a gross potential of about 4.5% of the state's total natural gas could be replaced with biogas within the state using anaerobic digestion. And then if in future, looking at future opportunities, thermal gasification or some other applications, that could certainly ramp up to 17.5% of our natural gas. So that's pretty exciting. And then Senate Bill 98 was actually an opportunity for our natural gas utilities to start using renewable natural gas within the state pipeline system. And it also allowed them to allocate a certain amount of their revenue to invest within for renewable natural gas infrastructure and cover some of those incremental cost difference of investments in RNG. And then I want to also highlight Oregon's interest in hydrogen. So we were a participant with Washington, Montana in the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. And so that's development and kind of testing the opportunity for a hydrogen economy within the Northwest. And we're certainly still excited about that. Federal funding is on pause, and there's some litigation around that, but it still belies our interest in advancing our understanding and how to integrate hydrogen within Oregon's economy and how to use it as a fuel for transportation and industry and potentially storage to support the resilience of the electricity grid. Certainly a lot of opportunities there. And we also conducted a renewable hydrogen study to look at these potential applications, as well as assess barriers to adoption, analyze potentially its forecasted costs within the state. And certainly that's available if people are interested in that. And lastly, I want to highlight the renewable portfolio standard, because although this is focused on kind of decarbonized electricity, because we have so much forestry waste, agricultural waste that historically we've used to burn that biomass to create electricity, a lot of that could be a potential feedstock within the state, and certainly an opportunity to invest that using those feedstocks to create low carbon fuels or other resources that could help the development of low carbon fuels within the state. And if we go to the next slide. So those were existing policies. I do want to look at kind of future-looking policy within Oregon. So we've published an Oregon energy strategy within the state. And so as part of this development of an energy strategy, we did a bunch of modeling to kind of test different pathways to meet our decarbonization targets within the state and see how that influences electricity, fuels, and a variety of different things. And I want to share at a high level, I know this is a really simple visualization, but just to kind of see the change in our reference area, which is our least cost path from what 2024 looks like to 2020 or 2050. And as you can see, there's a dramatic decline in the use of fuel, and a lot of that fuel is replaced by low carbon fuels to meet our decarbonization targets. So we'll still be definitely dependent on fuels, if not more so, because have less access to them. But we're still going to need fuels for aviation, medium heavy duty vehicles, freight rail, and maritime fuels. And a lot of these declines are going to be driven by electrification of transportation and also improvements in energy efficiency. But there's still going to be fuels are still going to be critical to Oregon's economy and our energy system. We'll still need it for resilience within our electricity system, as well as those applications that I mentioned within the transportation sector. It'll still be dependent on fuels well into 2050. Um, and then as you kind of look at this massive change, the big conversation for us is kind of considering the trade-offs. And if this level of change needs to occur, what does it look like in terms of short and long-term costs, effects on environmental justice communities, land use and natural resources, and more? So the energy strategy is a tool for us to start having these conversations within our state, identify opportunities, including how we could do things better or differently to kind of reach these targets. So if we go to the next slide, some of the challenges, yeah, I'm sure you're all familiar with this within your own states that we've run into, but I just want to highlight, we face a variety of challenges in decarbonizing our fuels and transportation and otherwise. And so with fuel supply, it can certainly be challenging to get the low carbon fuel supply that there is a demand for within our state. So even if we have demand, and we've certainly created an interest in it, it's sometimes challenging to get it and certainly get equal access to it throughout our state. And as far as siting facilities, we've had quite a few planned projects, people being interested in siting some fuel development within our state, but they've kind of stalled out. These projects are expensive to build and financing can be challenging. And we're also competing with other states. I mentioned kind of our geography. We're competing with other states within our region for that supply of low carbon fuel. So locating fuel production within the state, there's some benefit to that for resilience, but also kind of guaranteeing some level of access to these fuels. And as far as feedstocks, I mentioned we have some agricultural waste resources, some forest waste resources that could be used for low carbon fuels. But certainly when we've talked to different production sites or different organizations interested in locating low carbon fuels within the state, a lot of times they want to use existing feedstocks from that are actually imported from outside of the country and from other places, and it's hard to create that economy or create that pathway to use our local feedstocks for the fuel development. And so something we're certainly considering and trying to figure out how best to do it. And of course, affordability. Low carbon fuels cost more to produce. They're more expensive than their petroleum alternative. So we certainly are talking about how we can make these fuels more affordable and increase access within our state, and that's certainly a challenge. And then the resilience. So how can we maintain a safe and resilient system as we transition the fuels we use? How can we, and certainly how we use them changes. So if we look at like emergency management, a lot of those vehicles and are dependent on petroleum fuels. How can we change that? And how can we work with our local jurisdictions around the state to kind of give them the information they need to know how to change maybe their operations or what fuel storage they need, or if they're switching over to different fuels, what that could look like. Okay, so those are the general kind of focus areas I want to cover for you. I guess I'll highlight for these challenges to kind of wrap it up that the Oregon energy strategy we created was kind of to try to address as many of these challenges as we could. And I guess I'll encourage you to take a look at this strategy. We've certainly got links throughout this, and hopefully you'll take a look. And if you have any feedback or questions on it, we're certainly happy to meet with you individually if you have specific questions. But overall, I thank you for the time, and I do apologize that I'm going to have to run out of here a little bit early in a couple of minutes. But I appreciate the opportunity. I'll hand it over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a wealth of knowledge. And it's my pleasure now to introduce our next two speakers. And first, we're going to hear from Robin Vercruz, the Executive Director of the Low Carbon Fuels Coalition, followed by Tim Hughes, Program Manager at the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. Each of them bring a wealth of knowledge and experience, and they can summarize their background a little bit in their kind of introductories to their topic. So please welcome Robin.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for having me on the webinar here. So my name is Robin Vercruz. I'm with the Low Carbon Fuels Coalition. I have a long history at in the kind of renewable and clean fuel space. I've been in this role for going on 3 years, and we are Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm like trying to advance it. So we are a broad industry trade association that advocates for all of the above foundational policies. In the Clean Fuels program in Oregon is a signature example of these programs. We have members sort of across the spectrum that build consensus for these clean fuel standards, so come into advocacy campaigns and regulatory proceedings with sort of a broad perspective. We advocate for state clean fuel standards wherever opportunities arise, and I'll talk, I'll provide a map of where those opportunities exist at the moment. And then we also encourage and build bipartisan support by highlighting the across-the-board policy benefits. So climate is certainly the reason and rationale for these policies, but there are broader benefits, and I'll talk more about those. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of our members, which include all kinds of producers, feedstock providers, technology providers, service providers, market participants, large end users, and vertical trade associations. We have liquid, gaseous, and electric fuels represented, and you can kind of see the whole value chain on this slide. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of clean fuel standard policy. As I said, you've heard a bit about it on Michael's overview of the Clean Fuels program in Oregon. This is, very much along the same lines, same type policy approach. So it's all of the above, meaning it doesn't pick winners and losers. It's a performance-based program, which means all fuels and fuel pathways are measured against the same standard. It's a market-based program, so it's a transfer between buyers and sellers versus going through the annual budget appropriations of things like subsidies or dedicated incentives. And it's also science-based. So as knowledge evolves, ensuring that these programs credit all the carbon reductions that are warranted by high-integrity assessments. The benefits of the program are broad, and so this is just a few of them, but it does promote economic development in rural and agricultural communities. It provides long-term policy signal for certainty, which assists with financing. It is a policy design which is evolutionary versus revolutionary to minimize market disruption and cost. It reduces air pollution and associated health effects and costs. And there's a good study that was done for Oregon, which quantifies not only just the health benefits and associated costs of that, cost savings of that, but also the benefits to communities that are more impacted by air pollution in urban areas, for example, and adjacent to roadways. And it also facilitates fuels and feedstocks transitioning to new uses. One example is methanol to shipping. Another is biofuels into SAF. So, it provides a long-term trajectory for ensuring that clean fuels and clean feedstocks can be used over the long term and move into new applications as the on-road fuels electrify. Next slide. So this is a visual picture of what Michael described on these programs. So you've got an assigned declining trajectory of carbon intensity. Any fuels that are measured below that baseline receive credits proportional to how far they're below that line in a given year. And then fuels above that line accrue deficits and need to get rid of those deficits by buying credits with those who earn them. This is also a snapshot of the Oregon equivalent in California, which is the low carbon fuel standard, which many of you may have heard of. And what's important about this graph is there was a 20% reduction required by 2030, but you can see on the green line that the program has overachieved its ambition about 5 years ahead of schedule and at far less than anticipated cost. So I think that's a really important testament for a market-based, all-of-the-above approach. When California developed the program, they did not know what fuels would provide kind of the greatest carbon intensity reductions. But what, we all found is that the market and investors can be very creative and very quickly respond to the proper incentives, and putting the proper guardrails in place can channel that no pun, or actually pun intended, energy in a positive direction for climate and also promote economic development. Next slide. And really important to note is that these state-based policies, they supplement federal incentives. So things like the renewable fuel standard or U.S. federal tax credits, they stack on top of clean fuel standard program policy incentives so that you have a total value for clean fuels. The CFS provides that sort of long-term foundational value at the state level, much like the RFS has on the federal level. And the key caveat there is just to ensure that there's not double counting of the same attribute in different programs. So making sure that, when there is stacking that is, like with the renewable fuel standard, while they have greenhouse gas requirements for credit, that is not the basis of the program, and credits are not earned numerically based on the carbon intensity score. So, just making sure that you are maintaining integrity of the programs by not double counting the same attributes. Next slide. And this is the current states of play. So Washington, Oregon, and California have existing programs. New Mexico passed a bill. I'm actually in New Mexico at the rulemaking. We expect to see approval on the bill with the Environmental Improvement Board here in New Mexico in December. So hopefully, if all goes well, they'll get approval and we'll have a new, genuinely technology neutral program in play starting in the middle of 2026. The states in orange on the map are states that have either live legislation or legislation that is in the pipeline to be released for 2026. And the prospects of them, some are kind of more probable in 2026 than others, but all of them have been in play previously. And so has been an effort in these states to kind of socialize the idea, build support in the legislature, and with government agencies. In Pennsylvania in particular, it's a very interesting state. That bill has not launched previously, so it would be an initial launch, but it will launch with bipartisan support, which is exciting because with bipartisan co-sponsorship at the outset, that really does argue in favor of a market-based approach. And it does position these sort of policies well in the current environment where, there's not a lot people can agree on. So if we have a climate policy that can be agreed upon on both sides of the aisle, that can be a powerful thing to sort of be a counterweight to the sort of backsliding that's going on in the federal level and maintain momentum for climate action. Next slide. Oh, that's it. So the end. I'm happy to answer any questions down, as we finish up the presentations with Kathy.
Outstanding, Robin. I made a couple notes, and we're going to just go ahead and I'm looking forward to a Q&A and calling on you, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah, that was very exciting. Why don't I go ahead and turn it over to Tim then to share what he's got, because I think it builds so much on what's already been shared. Go ahead, Tim.
Hey, good afternoon. Tim Hughes. I serve as a project director for the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, as well as just recently taking on a role with the Midwest Regional Biomass Lead with Idaho National Laboratory, and that region covers from Indiana to Montana. So my background is I started out farming 20 years ago, full-time in Southern Kentucky, and then spent 20 years in state government in Frankfort, mostly in support of agriculture and rural development. Spent 5 years as their state biofuel director within the Energy Environment Cabinet. CAFE was formed back in 2006 as a public-private partnership between the federal government and various sectors of aviation, the airlines, airline manufacturers, and the airports, with the goal of trying to develop a non-petroleum drop-in jet fuel with the main focus on safety and performance. Also, the goal is to try to get a comparable cost with fossil fuel, but also showcasing the environmental improvements of the bio-based fuels, and then all doing this, increasing energy security for the United States. By working with a diverse set of stakeholders, we try to build relationships, share and collect data among the different entities, look for additional resources to help move this forward, and then help in advising the research, development, deployment of alternative jet fuels. Many of you are familiar with ethanol as one of the biofuels. I was farming at the time. They were talking about a product called gasohol, taking corn and harnessing the sugars and making alcohol. Back in the 70s and 80s, it sort of sputtered along. But then in the early 2000s, it really gained its footing with the renewable fuel standard. And a lot of people question, do we have the capabilities of producing food and fuel? And the slide from the National Corn Growers showcases that we've been able to increase and meet this market demand while keeping the acreage relatively same. And most of this has been done through genetic improvements of the crops, better agronomic practices, better sustainability. And if we look at the soybeans and biodiesel and renewable diesel, a similar story can be told. We've seen tremendous increase in yields. We're doing a better job on the farms of caring for the environment, but we're also producing, both cases, fuel, but from corn, you have the distillers grains that can go back into livestock, and from the soybeans, the protein supplement that can go into livestock feed as well. But we're here to talk about sustainable aviation fuel. And so the big challenge, as I mentioned at the beginning, for the aviation sector is safety. We can't put a product in the airplanes that has any questions about quality. And so the sustainable aviation fuel has developed a little slower because of the focus on not only safety, but then the sustainability measures. And if you look at this chart, you'll see that the jet fuel has a carbon range in between diesel and gasoline. And so it has to operate at very high altitudes at a very low freeze point. And it also has to operate in very warm conditions as the airplanes are sitting on the tarmac. Also, the fuel has to have a very low firing point so that you reduce the risk of explosions and things like that. So it's been a little slower developing, but we are seeing progress. To date, there are 8 pathways that have been approved through ASTM certification for the production of sustainable aviation fuel or synthetic aviation fuel, and then 3 through the co-processing route. And so you can look and see that variety of different types of biomass, everything from fats, oils, and greases to sugars, alcohols, and then lignins and things like that from woody biomass and crop residues, all can be converted, and there's been processes approved for each of those. The Aviation Benefits Beyond Borders documents the safety. Over 900,000 flights have been flown since 2011, utilizing a percentage of SAF. So we know it is a safe fuel when it's produced according to these standards. We have availability at over 69 airports. And then by 2030, with the current policies and industry commitments, over 20 million tons of SAF is expected to be used, and that's $45 billion going back into the economy for the purchase of these through various purchase agreements. Over 50 airlines have made commitments for inclusion rates of 5 to 30% between now and 2030, and I mentioned the 11 pathways that have been approved. This current year, we've seen a significant increase in production of SAF. Last year, most of the SAF that was being used in the United States was being imported. That's flipped. Now we have facilities in Montana, California, Louisiana that are all actively producing SAF, and we continue to see interest in producing more facilities. Basically, you can produce sustainable aviation fuel from any carbon source. And so I mentioned the traditional grains, corn and soybeans, but a lot of focus is on what we call intermediate oil seed crops like carinata, camelina, pennycress that can be grown during the winter months, and then further utilizing those acres, utilizing crop residues. In a state like Kentucky, over 50% of our state is forested. So looking at forest residues, dedicated energy crops like switchgrass and miscanthus. And each of you know your states better than I do, so you would know what products or feedstocks would potentially be used for fuel production there. And looking forward to the future, I mentioned most of the fuel that's currently being produced is using the HEFA process, basically taking fats, oils, and greases and upgrading those into jet fuel. We just learned this week that LanzaJet in Georgia has commercially produced 20,000 gallons of SAF from the alcohol to jet process. Looking at Fischer-Tropsch or other processes of using different types of crop residues. We see that in the future. And then longer term, the power to liquids, basically capturing CO2 and then utilizing it to produce the jet fuel from that carbon source. There's a number of states that are working on SAF initiatives. One that's got considerable attention over the last couple of years is in Minnesota. They partnered with Delta and a number of different entities there to start utilizing SAF there in the Minneapolis airport, but more importantly, looking to recruit investment in processing facilities. Just got off of a call with the Massachusetts and New England Regional SAF Hub. They've got aspirations of legislation coming up in the next session. Kentucky has the SAF Coalition, basically being led by the Cincinnati Airport, and a lot of focus on the transport airlines. And then in January, Cascadia Sustainable Aviation Accelerator will launch. And there's links to all of these initiatives. And so if you've got interest in those, you can visit their websites. There's been a number of economic impact studies looking at what it means for the state being able to utilize and recruit and produce SAF with interstate borders. And so these range from Third Way, looking sort of as a domestic opportunity, RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, looking at the Great Lakes region. This one was done by the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, looking at Iowa and the Midwest, primarily focused on ethanol and soy-based SAF production. And then this one is the PA Consulting that was released earlier this summer. And all of these look at different opportunities, both from an economic and environmental benefits of utilizing SAF and producing it within state borders. The main reason I'm on the call today is to talk about something that we put together at CAFE. If you go to our website, cafe.org, and then go to the state initiatives link, you'll find a U.S. map. And I'm going to switch gears here and go and show you what this would look like. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Change gears here. And so when you get to our website, if you will scroll down, you'll see a U.S. map. And so I'm most familiar with Kentucky, so I'm going to go to Kentucky. And then when you click on the individual state, you'll find a profile listing the State Energy Office, the Ascent affiliated universities. Ascent is led by Washington State University with a focus on aviation sustainability. land grant universities, extension programs, if you have a national energy lab, if there's a focus on energy research in the universities in Kentucky, both the University of Louisville, University of Kentucky, have research programs. The Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, State Economic Development Cabinet, you can go to their site and find out what kind of incentive programs are out there. University of Arkansas has completed a forestry profile for the states. And so one of these is included for each state, looking at the number of jobs created by the forestry sector, the forest woodland types. And if the state has its own forest study, that's included as well. Every 5 years, the Department of Agriculture does a census. We have that information so you can see the makeup of the different types of agriculture within your state. And then every year, the National Ag Statistics Service does an update with more current information. It doesn't cover as many topics, but there's also a land cover map. If you know Kentucky, the western third is mostly in row crops. The central part is a lot of pasture and forages. The eastern third is in woodlands, mostly hardwoods. We also look at the aviation importance in each state, the number of airports, how much cargo is transported. This is done by the NASA, your counterpart, the National Association of State Aviation Offices. And then we get back into some of the ag contacts. USDA has 3 primary offices in each state: the Farm Service Agency, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Rural Development, which many of you have worked with on loan programs and energy grants for renewable fuels, energy efficiency. If there's USDA research facilities, the State Aviation Office. In Kentucky, we have 2 primary cargo airports, Louisville and Cincinnati. Clean Fuels in many states has an active group working on alternative fuels. The number of refineries in each state. We have Marathon in Northeast Kentucky. We have 2 active ethanol plants, 2 biodiesel plants, no renewable diesel facilities. Currently, we don't have any targeted staff incentives, but we had legislation introduced this past session, and then also a resolution to establish a aviation task force that's been meeting. And then at the very end is sort of a catch-all. And so we put this together for all 50 states, and I really would appreciate if you all would look over that information. For your state, help us to keep that updated. If there's any people that we need to add, any areas of interest that we can add to that. And then I'll close with the last slide here. It's got my contact information on it. And would welcome any questions. And once again, these resources have been put together to try to help connect all the dots. I know in working in state government, many times we don't know what's going on down the hallway at the other end of the building. And so by having these links, I realized that the day we put them together, somebody changed jobs, got a promotion, or left that office. But at least you've got a starting point to make some introductions. And so Steve Zonka is on the call. Steve is our executive director, and he may want to offer some remarks as well, but would welcome any questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. That was, wow, like drinking from a fire hose, as they say. The map was great. I found out in a different venue at work that it's National Geography Day, and our GIS guy was pointing that out. And so, anyway, I'm not good at technology. I've got something in the background that my colleagues are trying to tell me, but I'm trying to talk and read and it's not having a good time. Evan, did you want to come off mic and?
So I'll call under all 3, our buddy Michael as well. But presentations were excellent, and this thought maybe we'll tie them together. Tim did a great job of showing. I'm sorry, I got a message saying I'm unstable. I'll keep talking in case you can hear me, though. Tim did a great job of pointing out the importance of data. And Robin had a really nice overview talking about the benefits of the various clean fuels programs. I would like to give her another benefit to add to that. Um, the quality of the data that's available on fuel use improves vastly. It turns out when you require a report that's third-party verified and you tie dollars to it, the quality of the data improves really fast. So as somebody that used to be a part of the parties that went out and beat the bushes to collect fuel use data, not only is it easier with these programs, but we have a much higher confidence in it as well. So I just throwing a little sidebar out there for, again, the benefits for these programs are many, from the obvious carbon reduction to some of these less obvious things. So yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Tom, for Q&A stuff, but I just wanted to throw that in. And again, thank you both for the presentation.
Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure I noticed any questions immediately, but definitely want to make this interactive. If you can just super quickly, Tim, because I had something I did want to kind of pivot to Robin on, but out of curiosity, what are the primary feedstocks for the SAF currently? What are those the same ones that are most promising? And then kind of the lowest cost ones? Just a quick word on that, and then we're going to pivot to Robin with kind of a more general question.
Yeah, most of the commercial production today is from fats, oils, and greases. So a lot of that's coming from used cooking oil. Some is coming from tallow, which is big fat, or lard, which is pork renderings. We can produce it from canola. There's been a little produced from camelina, but basically any type of lipid is the easiest way of producing it through what they call the heifer process. I mentioned the alcohol to jet. LanzaJet is the first one to build a commercial facility. It's a 10 million gallon facility in Georgia. There's a couple of others that have announced projects using that pathway, and that could basically use corn ethanol, sugarcane ethanol, or any type of sugars from starches. And then longer term, looking at the basically crop residues, some type of an energy crop such as miscanthus or switchgrass, and then hopefully longer term, some type of woody biomass, which could be a dedicated crop like willow or black locust, or the residues left over from milling processes. So but all of them are possible. It's just
Right,
right now,
right.
most of it's being produced from the fat, oil, and grease process.
Yeah, excellent. And so there's so many different points we could dive into deeper. We had a conversation in Oregon a little bit about, in my recollection from probably 15 years, maybe even longer ago, how fats, oils, and greases went to being something that people paid you to come and take to being a commodity. And now it kind of limits what we've done with biodiesel and that. But I want to go back to something I think is going to be maybe more universally interesting. And maybe this is Robin to you first, maybe. How might state energy offices balance transportation electrification efforts with the emergence of low carbon fuel markets? I know our grid is fairly low carbon already with the hydro base and growing wind and solar. But how do you think compounding the changes from the transportation sector impact conventional gasoline prices as well? So talk a little bit about kind of electrification in that mix and how it might impact gasoline price.
Yeah, so first of all, what the data shows is that while there are costs associated with these programs that we've seen, a per gallon cost, it's far lower than expected. And it's also a very small signal relative to petroleum prices, for example. So, the margins certainly reduce petroleum use. But until we have sort of a mass number of states, so a much higher volume, It's so marginal at the global level, which is the primary driver of petroleum prices, that you don't have sort of a big impact one way or another. And these programs to date have sort of been almost at the level of noise when, because petroleum prices can shift so quick, and these programs don't have those kind of shifts that translate, into the program. So, when you look at the data trends for credit prices versus retail gasoline prices, for example, there's no correlation, which is only to say that the signal's not strong enough to translate and drive gasoline price trends. In particular, to your bigger question on the sort of electrification and liquid fuels, and to some extent gaseous fuels, but to a lesser extent in general, there needs to be both, right? And I think we're seeing that with sort of the federal trends and the way they're going, and sort of removing some of those policy supports for electrification. And you're seeing far more increasing demand for electrification for things like AI data centers, crypto, things like that. So there's a lot of other kind of factors that are coming onto the scene that are having a significant influence on electricity supplies, which are going to have, very near-term implications, because those are coming on much more quickly than electric transportation is being adopted at this current time. I think that having a policy that's inclusive of biofuels and of electrification, and appropriately credits electrification for its efficiency, its superior efficiency, drivetrain efficiency relative to liquid transportation fuels, is really important. But to really get the carbon reductions that these programs are intended to achieve, you need an all of the above approach, and you need to be able to have a smooth transition so that consumers are not inconvenienced, and that drivers can purchase vehicles they can afford and that are convenient for them over the long term. And that's going to evolve. What ticks those boxes is going to evolve over time, but don't disrupt the system and impose sort of near-term costs, at the expense of, an orderly transition for drivers.
That makes a lot of sense. I saw a question in the chat, and from Sam Flegel. And Sam, did you want to come off mic and go ahead and ask that? If not, I can go ahead and read it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just curious about, like, it seems like there's a lot of entities that are very interested in low carbon fuels. And how do you go about navigating what's the most like verifiable data, and what entities you go through, and what strategies do you implement when it comes to carbon accounting and MMRV for low carbon fuels? And like, it seems like producers are kind of, as far as everyone I've talked to, it seems like they are kind of confused about where to even get their toes wet. And so I'm just curious to see like how you guys are approaching like getting people into carbon markets, and how you're making sure that data, all the data, is verifiable.
I'll let Steve jump on this one as well, but basically there's two verified accounting systems. The GREET model, which is led by Argonne National Laboratory, and then internationally, the CORSIA model. Both of those have identified basically baseline carbon intensity levels for fuels produced from various feedstocks. There is quite a bit of discussion prior to the election, USDA, of utilizing climate smart agriculture practices. There's not been a lot of updates on that since January. We know that the 45Z legislation has provision for the climate smart agriculture practices to help reduce the carbon intensity of some of those fuels. There's a number of different entities out there that are working, both independent organizations and companies that are affiliated with different commodities, that will come in and do the carbon scoring for the different crops. And then there's also verification models. One of the companies is RSB. They're an international firm that has sustainability standards. And so, that's a long-winded answer to say that there's progress being made. But as you mentioned, it can get confusing. And, a lot of people will say, well, this is the only way that they would accept. And others would say, well, they're more open to looking at different options. And I think agriculture as a whole is wanting to address this issue. I know the major commodity groups are doing training programs and helping farmers understand what the potential benefits are. But at the end of the day, right now farmers are really focused on profitability, and if somebody will pay them to do some extra steps, they're more than happy to interest in that. But at the end of the day, they've got to produce a crop and try to make ends meet. So they're focused on sustainability, but they're also wanting to do it in a way that remains profitable. So Steve, you might want to add something to that.
Thank you,
That was
Tim.
pretty
We've
good,
got
Tim.
another great question from Brian in Minnesota, and I'm just kind of thinking it's about state energy office's role in sort of, sharing working together with the DOT, Department of Transportation, et cetera. But in the interest of time and giving Jesse and Jasmine time to close it out, I believe we can promise to capture that and have somebody get back to Brian. Am I overreaching?
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely still open the floor to Robin and Tim and Steve to chime in on that if there are ideas. And then Jesse, as our transportation team lead here at NASEO, can probably speak to the efforts that exist to connect state energy offices with state DOTs, whether or not the topics we're discussing today fall into that bucket. But yeah, let's use the last few minutes for that. Instead of any other closeout from NASEO. Go ahead,
Thanks.
panelists.
I was just going to quickly to say, in response to Brian's question, there definitely are examples. I'm more familiar on the EV charging side. For years now, NASEO has been partnering with AASHTO, the Association of all the State Departments of Transportation, supporting their EV charging work, particularly around NEVI, since those federal dollars have generally flown to the DOTs. However, given state energy offices have a lot of history in this space, from like VW mint settlement dollars, et cetera, there are strong partnerships in many states. In some, the state energy office is even leading on planning and implementation with those programs. And I think we're seeing continued interest around other alternative fuels as well. I think some of the efforts that Tim touched on around sustainable aviation fuel, some of those state efforts certainly include both state energy offices and state DOTs. So lots of collaboration. For the sake of time, I'll pause there, but great question.
I'd echo that the most of the groups that we're working with that are multi-state or regional efforts, they are cooperating between different agencies. Sometimes those introductions, it takes a while to get to the right point of contact, but I know from the federal government, there's CMAQ funding available. And so sometimes, funding helps bring people together to put a project on the table. So.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, kind of more generally on at least clean fuel standard programs, they've so far most often sort of been housed for administration and governance in some form of environmental agency, but then that agency coordinates with the energy offices and the transportation folks to, align and make sure that everything is going to be put in place effectively. And every state's different. Some of the states where there's potential legislation that may emerge, they're looking at maybe having either energy or transportation be the governing agency. I think the main reason that it's been housed in the environmental agencies, I mean, first of all, it's climate, but environmental agencies tend to have a history of governing sort of complex environmental regulations and implementing them. And so it's just a natural fit on a practical level. And, you know, obviously there's some subject matter as well, but they certainly do not go it alone. It requires coordination for them to be able to implement a program like this.
And I could quickly jump in and just give our state as an example. And again, we're not very far along in the sustainable airline fuel, but our EV and our clean fuels program are a good example of, you probably don't want to own it, but sharing seems like the appropriate word. And again, in our state, we, in electrification being the recent focus, we actually have different agencies with different roles. So again, the Department of Transportation, they're doing the NEVI, they're doing the grants, our own state grants for charging infrastructure, because they, you know, they own roads and bridges and they build stuff and they do projects. And then on the other hand, the DEQ, because they're more regulatory, I think is another factor. They have a pretty strong role on, you know, the vehicle incentives and the clean fuels program. And as Michael pointed out in the beginning, our role tends to be like more of a you know, information sharing and coalescing agency. So we actually have things like a zero emission vehicle interagency working group, which is an awful title. We call it ZEVIWIG. But again, it kind of outlines that idea that, you know, if different people have different roles, communication is key. So this group actually meets regularly, so we know about what each other are doing, challenges, how to communicate if we get, you know, cross-connected with people. So yeah, I would like to underline your term of sharing that rather than owning it. And yeah, again, it's a communication challenge, but I think, frankly, all of this kind of boils down to that.
Yeah, I noticed we're kind of a couple minutes over the hour, so Jasmine and Jesse, I didn't know how you wanted to close out.
Yeah, well, I'll just close out. I think Jesse had to hop to another call, but appreciate all the questions that came in for this highly interactive session, and want to thank deeply Tom for one, moderating, and Tim and Robin and Evan and Michael, who had to jump as well, for your input and just fabulous perspectives on the state role in kind of adopting measures and also introducing the market conditions for bioenergy in your states. So with that, I'll close it out, and please do feel free to reach out to me or Jesse with any ideas in the future about how we continue these conversations. I know we could have spent probably another hour, but really appreciate your attention this afternoon. We'll be following up with the slides and recording.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all.